Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
Coming up today on The Story.
He just come up and he started talking to me. And he just said, you look down, mate. And so I just opened up to him about everything that had happened in my life. And I said to him, look, I've lost everything. I've destroyed everything. I've destroyed people. I've destroyed my career. I've just lost everything, and I don't see a point. I don't see any reason to still be here. And he just looked at me and he said, yeah, well, that's why I'm here.
The Story.
G'day, I'm Jimmy Colfax. Welcome to The Story. Well, Phil Galvin was leading a vibrant youth group in his young adult years when he took great offence at some of the changes the church leadership were asking him to make. Sadly, his anger led him to eventually walk away from the Lord and into an extremely dark period of his life. However, today we'll hear how the friendship of a wise, older Christian would help Phil turn his life around. And we'll also hear about some of the lessons he's learned from his experiences. Phil's joining us from Darwin in the Northern Territory, and he's chatting with Eric Scatterbo.
Phil Galvin, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much, Eric.
Glad to have you with us. And yes, this is an important lesson to learn that sometimes the devil will use being offended to get us off the path of following the Lord. Is that right?
Oh, it's one of his major weapons. And I've realised over time that it's a specifically great weapon for him for people who aren't humble, and I wasn't.
Oh, very good point. Let's find out what your story is all about. Where did it all begin?
So, I came from a broken home. I didn't meet my real father till I was about 18 years old. I went up to Geraldton to do my paediatrics training as a nurse and ran into a Galvin transport bus, and there he was.
Oh, wow. So how did you know it was your dad?
Well, I knew that he was a sort of, when I say bus, it was actually a truck I meant, and he was a transport guy. So I followed the bus, went to the house where it pulled up, and then I wasn't brave enough to go in, so I turned around and went away, and went back about an hour later. The truck was gone, so I went to the door, and this woman opened the door, and I said, is that Galvin Transport's not John Galvin, is it? And she said, well, which one are you, Peter or Phil? So I was invited in, and he came in about 10 minutes later, and I met my dad.
When you were 18 years old?
Yeah.
So do you know what happened? How did they split apart?
Yeah, look, they were incredibly young when they got married, and things got really tough, and Dad lost the farm, and they were sort of living on rabbits that he was shooting, and it just got too much for him, and he just couldn't take it, and he couldn't handle the stress, because I was the third child, so he couldn't handle the stress of these kids. My mum was pregnant with me when he just left.
Oh, wow. Do you have a relationship with him to this day?
Actually, he's the only person from family that I do have a relationship with. Well, did have a relationship with. He died 2 years ago.
Oh, okay.
But he was turned into a great man in his older life, and he was incredibly supportive to me when I was in my dark place.
Okay. Well, we'll hear about that eventually, but let's go back to your childhood. So a broken home, and what was your relationship like with your stepfather?
Yeah, my stepfather and I didn't get on. He was pretty jealous of me. I think that was because I was a pretty sickly kid. I had asthma from the time I was about one. I used to spend about 3 months a year in hospital with asthma, and didn't get out to play, so I spent a lot of time with my mum inside, and I think he was just jealous of that, and over time that jealousy became worse, and he became very aggressive to me, especially when he was drunk.
Oh, wow. And so you left home when you were 15?
Yeah, left home at 15. We had a huge fight, and it ended up out on the front garden, and I hit him, and he flattened me, and I just got up, grabbed some clothes, and took off, and I never went back. So that was when I was 15. But I then I did a whole lot of jobs, but I used to play a lot of football and got injured a lot and spent a bit of time in hospital and watched the nurses and thought I could do that. So when I was 17, I started my nursing training at Royal Perth Hospital.
Oh, so that's how you became interested in nursing?
Yeah, it was through injuries and just watching and thinking, wow, these guys do an amazing job, and it's, I just think I could do it. So so I applied, and shock horror, I actually got in, and I was actually one guy, and there were 600 female nurses in the hospital and one male. So
was that a problem for you?
It was not a problem. Men had to live out, girls lived in, and the girls didn't like living in, so they used to love coming over to my place and cooking for me. So I had a lot of female friends when I was going through there. But it also, I was very fortunate in that I learnt very early, and having spent a lot of time with my mum, I learnt very early that it didn't matter who was in charge. So I had no problem working with females as my superiors over a long period of time. So it was good for me.
And was faith a part of your life growing up?
It wasn't, well, sort of. My mother was a Christian, and she used to take us to church, a little church in a place called Rivervale. But at the moment I was old enough to say no, I stopped going because my stepfather wasn't a Christian, my stepbrothers were not Christians, and they were at home having fun while I was locked up in a church, and I didn't like that, so I said no real early, and I was very anti from that point on. But that sort of changed when nursing was, God had his hand on me, putting me in hospital, I think, because once I got into nursing, this nurse when I was in second year invited me to a barbecue, and went out to this barbecue. It was a Christian barbecue, and I started talking with this guy who was at the barbecue, and he asked me was I Christian, and I said no, and told him all of the reasons why God was not true, and there was no such personal thing, because otherwise all these things wouldn't happen. Went on for about 45 minutes, and he just stood there and listened to me. And when I finally drew breath at 45 and had it enough to say, he just said, well, look, I've listened to you for 45 minutes. Can you listen to me for 3? A bit hard to say no to that.
Yeah.
So I did, and I didn't agree with what he said, but he told me about how much Jesus loved me, told me that he had died for me, and told me about the truth of God's word. I didn't actually accept it, but I went home thinking about it, and God's so clever. A couple of days later, I was walking down the street, and this guy handed me a pamphlet, and I can remember it and see it to this day. And on the front, in big white letters of this black pamphlet, was "There is no God." And I thought, yeah, that's right. So I took it and went home and I read it. And I opened the first page, and it said, "It just so happens that the world spins at just the right speed that you're neither squashed against it nor thrown off it." And it went through all of these other things, like just so happens that the atmosphere has the right amount of oxygen to support human life. Just so happens that the topsoil, and so on and so on. And at the last page, I opened the last page, it says, "The fool hath said in his heart," I get emotional even now thinking about it. "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God." And I dropped down and cried and gave my heart to Jesus at the church. I went to the church the next day, the next Sunday, and went forward and accepted Christ. And that was the start of my Christian walk.
Wow. I mean, the way God uniquely worked it out, circumstances, just what you needed right at that time in your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic.
And for the first time, and I saw God as a dad, and I hadn't had one. And,
yeah.
And so, yeah, it just fitted, it just fitted.
So you're off to a good start. You get married and you have some children?
Yeah, we got married. We had 2 girls, and I started. There was another church plant for the same denomination out in a brand new suburb of Perth, and I went out there to help with that, and I started a youth group out there, and the youth group grew faster than the church grew, and this was the beginning of the end, one end, in that the elders of the church came to me and said, "Look, you're too young a Christian to be handling this many new Christians and new people and new young adults and youth, we need to put an elder in here to oversee what you're doing and help you plan the program and be at all of the things. And I just said to them, look, you guys aren't growing a church, I'm growing a youth group. You want to take the youth group? Go for it, I'm out of here. And I walked away from the church, and I actually said to God on the way out the door, I said, it's all right, God, you and me, we're fine. They're idiots, and you and me, we know what it's all about. And out I went.
Huh. Do you think there was some wisdom in what they were saying at that time?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing, and I wasn't old enough to be able to answer the questions that I was getting, but I was not humble. I was not a humble person, and so the devil was able to get in because offence is one of his major weapons, and he uses it specifically against people who are not humble, and I certainly was not humble. And so he just pats me on the back and encourages me to think about them as wrong and me as right, and so the offence was just grew and grew and grew. And, I really thought that I'd be okay with just me and God, Mm-hmm. Forget that God says, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together. I just thought, yeah, but that's for other people. I'm okay, me and God, we're good. But we weren't.
You're listening to The Story. Today, Phil Galvin is joining us from the studios of Darwin's 97.7 FM in the Northern Territory. He's sharing how a root of bitterness took hold in his life and sent him on a downward spiral. We'll hear how the friendship of a wise, older Christian helps turn it all around when we return.
The Story. If this program has highlighted something you'd like prayer for, we'd love to pray for you. Call 1-800-PRAY-FOR-ME. That's 1-800-772-936. It's a free call. Or text 0401 132 888.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Colfax, and this is The Story. We're continuing with Phil Galvin chatting with Eric Scatterbo about how he let anger and bitterness almost completely destroy his life. But as we'll hear, the Lord used a wise, older Christian gentleman to help turn Phil's life around.
My life actually, from a professional point of view, started to really progress. And I went and did... My marriage actually fell apart not long after that, but my career expanded, and the marriage fell apart because God wasn't in it, and that was the key reason. There were other things that were the final straws, but that was they only occurred because I didn't have God leading my life, and I was doing stupid things. I was very unfaithful to my wife, and she couldn't take that, and she left, and so she should have. Then I went overseas to England and got a director of nursing position in a very large private hospital. And then I ended up managing a group of nursing homes spread all over the country. Got married again, had another child, but did exactly the same thing in that marriage. And I eventually got myself into some really, really deep trouble because I just thought, well, I need to get more money, I need to be doing more stuff, and I haven't got what I need to do it, so I'll just get it some other way, and got myself into trouble. Ended up being caught and lost everything. My wife, my family, my career, my nursing registration was gone. It was then I couldn't get any lower. But this old man came into my life, and he had been a very, very successful businessman, had a huge business in England. And God said to him one day, I want you to give up the business and start to go out and just love on and serve people who are in trouble and people who don't know or have fallen away from God. And he didn't question it for a moment. He apparently finished the business that week, finished it all up, and off he went and started doing prison ministry and a whole lot of other things.
So how did you meet him?
Well, I just ran into him. I was out and I was on my own, and he just come up and he started talking to me, and he just said, "You look down, mate," and so I just opened up to him about everything that had happened in my life, and I said to him, look, I've lost everything. I've destroyed everything. I've destroyed people. I've destroyed my career. I've just lost everything, and I don't see a point. I don't see any reason to still be here. And he just looked at me and he said, yeah, well, that's why I'm here, and that's why God sent me. And I just looked at him and I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, there is a reason, and nothing happens to us that God doesn't know about. And he's brought you and me together now so that your relationship with him can begin. And I said, well, actually, I had one before. He said, well, there you are. He said, so he wants that to rekindle and to grow and to start and for you to come back to him, because, there's a big story in the Bible. It's about a guy called the prodigal son. And he did worse than you, but his dad took him back, and God and Jesus want you to come back to them. And that was the start. And he worked with me and fed the Word of God into me for about 6 months, and I came back to Australia after that. And first thing I did was I got myself to Perth, because I was actually up at Shark Bay with my dad when I first came back, because I was licking wounds and trying to work out how I'd destroyed so much. But God just moved me down to Perth, and I went to Victory Life Church in Perth. Pastor Margaret Court is the pastor there, but she also has a college called Victory Bible School. And I did 3 years there, and I didn't expect to get in, but her and the principal basically said, "You're why we're here."
Yeah. I just wanted to stop for a moment here and just observe that here you were as a child, you were fatherless, both your earthly father and then your stepfather, a bad relationship. And then God came into your life as your heavenly father, but then through that feeling of offense at that church, you kind of walked away from church. Well, did you walk away from God, or were you mad at God at that point? Or,
No, I was never mad at God.
No.
I was never mad at God. I was mad at people that called themselves the church.
But did the bitterness kind of consume you?
Absolutely. I still knew in my heart that God was real, and I still spoke to him about all the stuff that I was doing.
Yeah.
But I couldn't reconcile the feelings that I had about the church with that. And I was angry, I was bitter, I was broken. I was just broken.
But it's interesting that God used this older man, another father figure in your life. Because God knows exactly what you want and need.
Yeah.
And he used this father figure to lead you back to him.
Yeah, exactly right.
That's beautiful.
And it couldn't have been a woman, because most of my sin revolved around women. And so I wouldn't have been hearing in the same way. It had to be a man.
But ironically, it was Pastor Margaret Court and Pastor Judy who played a big role in helping you turn around.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. By the time I got back to Perth, I was back on fire. This man had relit the fire.
Oh, okay.
And so I was back into the Word, and I was seeking out the church, and I just got led to Victory Life. And Pastor Margaret was just so, she's so powerful, so strong, and so, she said, look, God forgives you. But she talked to me about the fact that, and she was the first one who ever had, and it's something that I share with people all the time. And she her and Pastor Judy both shared with me about the fact that God forgives everything that you did. But because we live on the earth, people don't. So there are consequences to everything that we do. And even though you are forgiven, you still have to bear the consequences of the acts that you've committed. And the consequences are that you've lost your nursing registration, you've lost your family, you've lost your home, you've lost your bank account, you've lost everything.
Yeah.
But God has got you, and God is going to turn it all around. And he sure did.
Yeah. Tell us about that. How did it begin to turn around?
So 3 years of Bible college in itself was a miracle, because I had no money, and it cost money to do Bible college. Pastor Margaret said to me, Phil, I've got something that I think would help you, not just financially, but also with your humility, because I had a major problem with that. And she said, I need somebody to clean the toilets in the church. I need them to be done every day before Bible college starts.
Well,
I said, I'm your man.
that's humility right there. How did you say you responded?
I just said, I'm your man. And you know what? That hour before college started every morning was the hour I spent with God. And I was cleaning toilets and singing worship and praying and praising. And that was the best hour of the day, as it turned out. But it's very humbling to come from somebody who manages 600 staff to somebody who's cleaning toilets.
I never heard cleaning toilets described quite like that.
It was a gift from God in so many ways, and I also did. In second year, we did some mission studies, and I went to Indonesia and worked with a wonderful pastor over there in Kupang in West Timor, Pastor John, and still have a great relationship with him. But it was then that God showed me that Indonesia was the place, and that I was called to the nation of Indonesia. And Pastor Margaret at graduation said to me, Phil, I know you're called to Indonesia, but don't go before God. Wait on him. He'll show you the time. He'll show you when. There's still some things he needs to do within you to make you his servant in that place that he wants. So I'm still waiting. But I did start working over there with Pastor John, and God got me a job up here in Darwin, working as a chef on a gas plant. So I was a breakfast chef out on a gas plant at a place called Wadeye. And I was working 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off, and I was doing 2 weeks at the gas plant, and then I'd fly into the airport, sleep at the airport, fly to Indonesia and do mission work with Pastor John, fly back, sleep at the airport and fly back. So I did that for 2 years.
Wow. Wow.
But then I met my amazing wife through a whole, and mate, this is another interview, but the way that God... Because at Bible college, Pastor Judy prophesied over me and said, Phil, God wants you to know that you're going to be married again. And when you marry, that will be the healing of all that has gone before. And I just said, Pastor Judy, that's never going to happen. I'm useless at it. I'm a terrible father, a terrible husband. I'm no good at it. It's not going to happen. And me and God are just so good at the moment. I'm loving my life. And she said to me, Phil, don't tell me, I'm just the messenger. So I went and argued with God for about 6 months and heard nothing from God at all. And I eventually, I'm a bit slow learner, but eventually I realised he wasn't talking to me because he'd already told me. So I said, all right, okay, if you want me to get married again, here's my list. And I wrote out this huge long list with some absurd things on it. Some right things like she had to love God more than she loved me. She had to be servant-hearted. God had to be the centre of her universe.
Good things.
But then I got down to real detailed stuff like she had to have a convergent squint, not a big one, just a little one, so that when she looked at me, I wasn't sure if she was looking at me or looking past me, because I found that really attractive. She also had to have a slight pigeon toed, not when she's walking, but just when she's standing. So when I stand behind her and she's, say, washing up at the sink, I can see these beautiful little toes just pointing in slightly to each other, because I found that, stupid things like this. She had to be just the right height so that when I put my arm on her shoulder, it could be perfectly flat. I didn't lean down or lean up,
You were very specific.
Very specific.
Yeah.
And there's a huge long story about how that actually came to be. But to cut it short, God found that person for me who totally filled that,
right down to the toes.
Down to the toes, down to the squint. Down to the shoulder height that was perfect. Yeah, absolutely everything. And we got married. But she's Indonesian, obviously. And we got married, and we've got a 12-year-old son now. His name's Samuel, and he's the light of our lives.
Fantastic.
Next to the Lord, of course.
Wow. Well, you've certainly come full circle. You've learned so much in your life. Thank you so much for sharing your incredible story with us today.
That's an absolute pleasure.
That was Eric Scatterbo chatting with Phil Galvin, who joined us from the studios of Darwin's 97.7 FM in the Northern Territory, where Phil has been the general manager for several years. And it was great to hear how God worked in Phil's life after he had almost lost everything when he let anger and bitterness get a hold of him. As the Bible says, see to it that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, because by it many are defiled. Rather, we are to strive for peace with everyone and should walk in forgiveness. This is the important lesson that Phil had to learn, as well as the importance of humility. And you can't get much more humble than washing toilets for the Bible school like Phil did. Well, if you're struggling with bitterness and holding grudges and would like to pray about it and be set free, our prayer line is 1-800-PRAY-FOR-ME. That's 1-800-772-936. We'd love to pray for you. On that number again, 1-800-772-936. Well, thanks for joining us for Phil Galvin's story. I'm Jimmy Colfax, encouraging you to share your story with someone today.
Next time on The Story.
We were forbidden to go to scripture or learn about the Lord because Dad thought it would corrupt us, and he didn't want our minds corrupted by religion. And so in a way it felt really good and free, because you felt like you could do anything you like. Because I thought there was no God, I would think nothing of stealing money out of Mum's purse, and I was rude and cheeky and entitled, and I was a horrible child.
Barbara Holland's father was a communist, and she was brought up as a strict atheist by her parents. She went on to become an artist and lived a hippie lifestyle on a farm with her husband. We'll hear how Barbara eventually gave her heart to the Lord next time.
The Story. Just another way Vision is connecting faith to life.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.